All right, hello, welcome everyone to this month's KeyShot webinar. I'm Josh Mings, Director of Marketing here at Luxion. Really glad you could join us today. Today you'll see the KeyShot workflow for creating product design visuals. And the person showing you how this is done is none other than CG artist and KeyShot user extraordinaire Esben Oxholm. He'll be using KeyShot 6, which you can download and try at keyshot.com. And now this webinar, along with the previous webinars and tutorials, will be available on the website as well. So with that, Esben, thanks for being here. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice intro. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many here. My name is Esben Oxholm, and I'm in Copenhagen, Denmark. I have been using KeyShot since 2011, and I started using it while doing a bachelor in product design engineering, and I wanted a software that quickly and easy could produce some nice visuals, and I found that KeyShot was perfect for that. And that also means that I have no formal training in KeyShot or 3D graphics in general. I have just learned it by using it. If you would like to ask me a question later or just get in contact, you can go to my webpage, esbenoxholm.dk. And here down at the bottom, I have a contact form, or you can go to any of these social media and connect there. I want to mention that I'm sitting on a kind of old Mac. It's an iMac. It only has got 4 cores, but it's working pretty fine. KeyShot on this machine anyways, and I think that's a good point to state that you don't need a huge workstation to run KeyShot. There is a few things I want to talk about before getting into KeyShot, and that is my pre-KeyShot workflow. And one thing that I think is important is to be conscious about what I'm actually doing. That maybe sounds a bit trite, but I remember when starting using KeyShot, I was just dragging and dropping materials and environments over because it was so easy until something looked good, and if it didn't look good, I just tried another material or another environment. But I forgot to be conscious about why or when it looked good, so I was never able to replicate it easily. So now what I do, I know what kind of model I have to work with, and then I start by asking a lot of what questions, like what's the purpose of the rendering, what kind of style do I want to achieve, what should be the point of focus, what kind of lighting do I want, should it be dramatic or neutral, or am I going to do a hero shot that is really nice and maybe a bit over the top, or is it for a catalog where it needs to be more subtle and neutral looking? And what asking all those questions do is that when you finally open up KeyShot, you can get to a nice result quicker because you have a kind of a guidance on which way to go. And when I have asked all those what questions, I ask why. So why should that be the point of focus, and why do I need that kind of lighting, and so on. And what that does is it's just good to question yourself and ask if you did the right choice in the first place. And also before starting KeyShot, I tend to use reference images a lot. For example, when creating this engine rendering, I knew I was going for a kind of over-the-top hero shot with a lot of effects and stuff going on, and I had the model. And then I went to sites like Behance or Pinterest or whatever, something like that, and searched for engine renderings. And whenever I came across something that I thought looked nice, I saved it, and finally I put all the images that I found together in this mood board. And then again, I looked at each of them and asked, why did I like this one? And for this one, it was like how it was sharp, and I liked the blue and the yellow colors, and also the way it reflected in the floor. And for this one, it was the light coming from above and all these small particles flowing around. And for this, it was the smoke, and the same one for this down here. And also the ground plane here I thought looked pretty cool. And for this one, again, it was the blue and yellow lighting, oversaturated lighting, and how the bump map was looking on this model. So I kind of took all those different elements and combined them into my rendering. And if I hadn't looked at all these reference images and asked what and why look good on them, this rendering wouldn't look like this. I'm pretty sure about that. So just to rephrase myself, asking these questions help you to have a clear vision before opening KeyShot, and that helps you work faster when you're inside KeyShot. Yep. So let's start to have a look at the actual model that we're going to use in KeyShot. And this is the watch. I modeled it inside Rhino. And there's really not much to it. I have the entire model on one layer, except for the glass, because I wanted to be able to hide it quickly when I did the face of the watch. What I want to mention is one thing that I think is really important when working with your models, is that you remember to have roundings on all your edges. So instead of having this sharp edge, you are having a tiny rounding. And also down to the smallest level, like on the hour hand and minute hand, it's important that you remember to have just tiny fillets, because it makes the light able to reflect off the surface, and it helps you to draw the object better when you are putting lighting on it. I can real quick show you examples. Yep. If you look at the edge up here and this highlight going along this edge, if I hadn't put on the roundings, I couldn't have made those highlights. And also around this edge and around here. So it really helps you to make your final rendering look better. And yeah, I think that's what I want to say about the watch. So let's go into KeyShot. Any questions so far? I'm happy to answer them along the way. Otherwise,
Nothing so far.
Okay, great. The way I import the file is just to simply drag the original Rhino file into my scene. And yeah, I usually keep the default settings. I want the camera to look at geometry, and I import the NURBS data. I'm not sure I'm going to use it, but they're nice to have anyways if I find out later that I need to use them. Yeah. One thing I want to mention, you have probably noticed that this is not the standard default environment, and I found myself always changing it as the first thing when I opened up KeyShot. And recently I found out that you can go to preferences and define another one here. So I find that quite useful. I will start just by making my background a solid color, so it's not distracting while we are positioning the watch, because that's the first thing I like to do, to get my position of the object down and get my composition locked down, because the way that I'm going to do the light depends a lot of the composition and the angle of the watch. And for this rendering, I want the face of the watch and the crown of the watch to be like the focal point. And I want the watch to lie down on a surface. So I will just rotate the watch. And it can be a bit tricky to see whether it's lying perfectly on the ground plane or not. So what I like to do here is to go to the camera tab and change the view to orthographic, taking one of the standard views, left for example, and turning on the ground grid. And that makes it quite easy to see how well things are coming together. Something like that. I don't mind that it's protruding a little bit over here because it's not going to be visible. At least not for this rendering. So when I have done that, I turn off the ground grid and I go back to perspective. And as I said, I want this area to be the point of focus. So, and I also want some of these details in the back to show, but they should be secondary. So an angle, something around this area is going to be great. And when I position my camera, what I'm looking out for is especially tangents. And that is where like the outline of one part is sort of collinear with the outline of the other part. So they kind of melt together and make the composition look flat. And also something like this where the edge in here and this edge is going together. I don't think that looks very nice. So something like this. And then you should also remember to play with the focal length. And I usually change it according to what kind of mood I want to achieve with the image. If I want to convey things like excitement and energy, I find that a quite low focal length can help to convey that certain emotion. I think for the engine I showed before, I was down to something like 17. But for this watch, that I think a calm look of the final render is way more appropriate for the design and aesthetics of the watch. So I'm going with something like 80 or 85. I don't like putting it too high because it's getting too close to an orthographic look, I think. So something in this area. And I think this is quite good. What I sometimes do when I think I'm done is to make the image the object totally black and look at the outline of the object itself to see if that's good looking or not. It's a bit hard to explain, but if you take a look at the outline now compared to an outline like this, at least I think the first one looked way better because all these small holes look kind of disturbing and confusing. And I think that having a strong solid silhouette helps to create a better overall composition. And then I am at a point where I like to settle on the aspect ratio. So I go to my image tab, and usually I just choose one of the presets. It's not that important right now, but at least I know whether it should be a landscape or portrait from it. And for this, I'm going for a landscape. And when I have that, it's time to position the object within the frame of the image. And again, when doing a calm and nice looking image, I like to have some space the way the object is facing. So here the watch is facing left, so I like to have a bit of air going on here to make room for the object to breathe, so to speak. If I just quickly change the background color to so we easily can see the frame. Yeah. Something like this sort of create some kind of tension and unease that doesn't support the look and design of the watch. So around here, and I make sure that it's not way over here because I think I like to have a bit of gap between the object and frame over here as well. Yeah, and then sometimes I also use inside the camera tab. I turn on the grid just to see to be able to see the exact width of the frame. And usually I don't put the point of focus directly in the mid, but I think it works quite well for this one. So there aren't rules that you always can follow. You should always use your eyes and look if it looks good and ask why if it doesn't look good. And also if it looks good, and remember it to the next time you have to create something similar. And when I am happy with my composition, I create a new camera by clicking the button up here, calling it something like final, and log it. So that was kind of the composition part. And any questions so far before moving on?
Yeah, Esben, what units are you using in your scene? Do you always model in millimeters, for example?
Yeah, sometimes I forget to do it like in a good way, but usually I model in millimeter, yeah.
Okay.
But when working with bigger objects like houses or so, it maybe makes sense to use centimeters or meters. But yeah, usually I use millimeters.
Sure. Okay. And then can you touch quickly on why you would model the fillets in the model rather than apply the rounded edges in KeyShot?
In my experience, it creates a better result when I'm doing it in the CAD software, and that also makes me able to create different sizes of fillets on one object compared to doing it in KeyShot where it's the same size applied to the entire object.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's why.
All right. Yeah, I think that's good for now. Continue on.
Yep. Here's another quick tip to move on. It's the save reminder that I discovered recently. Maybe you know it already, but you can set it in here in the preferences to remind you to save every 5 minutes or 10 minutes and so on. And I think that is quite nice because when I get into it, I sometimes forget to save, and it really sucks if the scene crashes or something else goes wrong. So use that if you like to. And then I want to move on showing how I create my ground place ground planes. I had a request for that, and I start by going to Edit, Add Geometry, and Add Ground Plane. Then I double-click the ground plane, which brings me to the Material tab of it, and I change the material to metallic paint. And I kind of always use metallic paint for my ground planes because I think that the metal colored slider and having both the metal roughness and the clear coat roughness helps me to kind of tune in the look that I want, a mixture of rough and shiny, so to speak. And when I have done that, I like to move into the material graph. Whoops. Yeah, sometimes it does that. It doesn't remember this. Yeah, looking good. So the quality of your ground plane, it relies a lot on the quality of the texture you're using, I believe. So having a great texture is the first step to a great ground plane. And I usually find the ones that I use on sites like textures.com and epuscura.com, where you can download a certain amount of nice textures for free. So check those out if you don't know them already. I have links for them in my on my webpage, on the same page where you can download the scene. Oh, I actually forgot to tell that if you want to look closer at the exact scene and how I set up all the materials, you can go to my webpage, esbenoxholm.dk/DIY, or the button is up here. And you can download the scene, the KeyShot scene included with the original model, and also all the post-processing that I did to it. And if you're just interested in the KeyShot scene, you can also go to the new download section of KeyShot.com, where it is available as well. So check that out. Like that. And for this ground plane, I want to use the scratch metal surface that I have here, so I simply drag it over, and I can close the library down for now. So I had a bit more space for my image. And I start by dragging the texture map into the base color. And because of the reflection here, it's quite hard to see what's going on. But by pressing C on your keyboard, you can get a preview of the color only. You can also use the button up here. So I use that while I adjust the scale for my texture. And this looks good. I don't care about right now that the tiling is visible, because it's going to be blurred out by the depth of field that I'm going to apply later on. So when you're done adjusting the scale and also maybe the brightness and contrast, depending on the look, you can press C on the keyboard again to go back. Sorry. And then I duplicate the texture map and drag it into the bump input node. And now things look quite crazy. But I will turn my environment around by pressing Command and left click and drag to get rid of that crazy highlight. So you really see here also how much the light and the texture and the materials, how much they affect each other. And I can see right now that my bump map, all the scratches are going upwards, and I want them to go downwards, so I put in a negative value in the bump height, and something like 0.5 I think will work fine. what I am looking after here is how the reflections reacts to the bump map, because that's kind of the important part, at least I think. I think this is looking quite nice. Then I'm creating another duplicate, and I'm going to put it into the clear coat roughness, but I would like to be able to desaturate it first. So to do that, I add in a color adjust utility node by right-clicking, going to utilities, and going into, or choosing the color adjust. And I'm taking the map, putting into the color, and the output of the color adjust, and put it in the node with the plus sign, and what's going on, and drag it down to the clear coat roughness. To dial in this map the best, I'm going to disable the bump map and the base color for now. And what the clear coat roughness map does, if I go here, 2 seconds. Yeah, something like this. All the black parts are going to be shiny, while all the white parts are going to be rough, and the gray parts all in between. So if I exit the preview again, you can see that the parts where there were some white, there's not very much, the reflection is very rough, and in the black areas it's very shiny. But I think overall it's a bit too shiny, so by taking the value up, I am making the map looking brighter. Yeah. And that helps to make the entire surface less reflective. Or not less reflective, but reflection will be more rough. I adjust it until I'm kind of satisfied with the look. And when I am, I turn on the bump map and the base color again. And that's kind of it. And then I just adjust all these values. I can spend way too much time on this, but for this webinar we have to move on. So I close the graph down and expand this view again, and bringing the library and project tab back again. You can press space and M on your keyboard to do that. And now I want to show you how I set the depth of field. I unlock my camera and going to down in the bottom there's the lens effects, and I am clicking where I would like my focal point to be. Again, it's I know I want this area to be the one in focus. And I can see that it's the f-stop is way too small. But I just want to turn on the region rendering first, because it really helps things to res up way quicker, and it's easier to assess the settings. You see that now when it's on, and it's only rendering out this part of the image, I'm going at 50 frames per second. And if I turn it off, we're down to 12, so it's like 6 times faster, or 5 times faster to res up doing like this. And I only need to be able to see this part of the image while adjusting the f-stop, because it will be the same along the length of the image. So I will just give it a few seconds. And already you start to see the thin line of the focus down here, and you see how much of the watch face is in focus and how much it blurs out here. And I think it's a bit too much, so I will turn it up to something like 12 or maybe even 15. I think that looks great. So I will go back and turn off the region. Oh. So that's kind of the ground plane and the depth of field, and now I want to show you how my workflow creating the lighting for a scene like this. And to do that, I want to import the model with all the textures on, and I have this BIP file with the watch only with textures, and I can drag that over to my scene here. Import, make sure it says import file and add to scene. And I don't want to adjust the camera, and I don't want to import cameras. And then I just say import. And there it is. Nice. I will just go ahead and turn on the other one off. So when time's allowed for it, I like to create the HDRI from the bottom up, and sometimes I start with a total black environment, and sometimes I use one of these gradients. And I think this one is going to be fine for this one. And with that applied, I open up the HDR editor. And again, I want this face to be the focal point and the ground, so I start by setting a highlight on those, going to the Pin tab and click Set Highlight. As it says here that I can command click on the area that I want to set a highlight, and it puts in a highlight. And you see it right away in the HDR editor. I want the radius to be larger, so the light will also spill a bit out on the edge here. Something like that. And I almost always put in some linear fall off because I think it looks a bit more realistic. But sometimes I don't, depending on the need. So that is the light for the face. Maybe bump up the brightness a bit. And now I want to have a highlight here on the crown. So again, I command click, and right away it puts in another pin that's reflecting off directly from where I pointed. And I think the radius is nice, but I want the brightness to be a bit higher, something like that. Then I usually want to separate my object from the background by using lighting. So I command click here in the background, and I get this nice light falling across my scene. Actually, one thing I forgot to adjust on the ground plane was the metal roughness. I wanted actually to be a bit more rough here, and also the metal coverage. Sometimes it looks nice when I put that to white and turn it up. Sometimes it doesn't make a difference for the ground plane, but yeah. I just drag the pin a bit to the left to have a bit more gradient going on up here. I think I will just turn on my depth of field. I don't know why it disappeared. Sorry about that. Great. And for this backlighting, I want to add some color to it. A bit of blue, so it kind of looked like diffuse light coming from the sky through a window or something. I think that looks pretty cool. And you see that it clearly separates the object from the background compared to when I not had it. Then I want to add a fill light here on the leather band, so it's going to be a bit more bright. Right now it's kind of dark. So I go to set highlight again and command click on this area. And I think the radius needs to be a bit bigger and the brightness also to be quite high. I think I will position it around here. And this fill light I will give a orange yellowish color to have a bit of dynamics going on between the blue light up here and the yellow light down here. I think that always gives a nice effect, and you can do it quite subtle, like this. And then I think we need a highlight around here to really draw out the face of the clock. So again, I command click, and right away I get my pin reflecting off exactly where I pointed. I want to make it a bit bigger. Yeah, this looks great, I think. I can go on for this forever, but have to move on. What I like to do is to turn all of my pins off and then go through them from the top and down, like backwards compared to how I put them, just to assess them one by one and see what they do to the object and how they contribute to the overall lighting. And then while doing that, I adjust them if I think they are not positioned correctly, and sometimes I also see or I get a light setup that I actually like more than compared to having them all turned on. But for this, I think it works best with them all turned on. So that's kind of my process for the lighting. The more complex your object is, the more complex your light setup is also going to be. And sometimes I have up to something like 15 pins doing or reflecting off different surfaces of the object. And when you're done with your custom HDR, always remember to save it out as a map for itself in my KeyShot resource map or folder. In the environment folder, I have made a folder called custom, where I put all my custom HDR eyes. So I can always access them later, and I do not write them over by accident. So this is kind of the process for this watch rendering. A thing that I want to talk about as an end is that I really like to work in iterations. when I have arrived at a result like this, I usually render it out and come back in a few hours or the next day and have a look at it. And I ask myself what I think should be different if this rendering was to impress me. What should be different if I should be impressed by the rendering? And then I write all that stuff down, making notes about the background and the lighting and the materials. And then I go into KeyShot and make all those changes. And then I render that out and look at it again as if it was not my own image, but as if someone else did it, and ask what should have been different if I should think that it was a really cool rendering. And then I go on and do it until I reach the deadline or that I am satisfied. So my last point to you would be to go impress yourself, because I have found that trying to impress myself helped me to push myself and pay attention to details that I usually wouldn't do, and it helps me to put an effort into all those things and stuff that makes an impressive rendering. So go impress yourself. Any questions or something that you want me to explain a bit better?
Hey Esben, Sandy was
Hey.
wondering if there is a reason why you set the DOF before getting your lighting and materials set up.
Actually, I usually do the depth of field as the last part. Yeah, but sometimes while in the process, I also do it because maybe I get bored of doing materials and want something else to do, and just try things out to see how it's going to work. But usually I wait until the end to do it.
Cool. And do you find using DOF and KeyShot, do you usually use that more or do it in post?
I always do it in KeyShot because I think it looks way more better than doing it post, especially when it comes to a depth of field that is so, sharp or tiny like this, and things are really blurred out in the background. I think it looks better doing in KeyShot, especially for just a still rendering. Then the extra rendering time doesn't do anything. It's not a problem for me, at least.
Great. Anything else, Rex?
Yeah, there is. Let's see. Can you show your render settings and maybe talk about how you determined what settings to use for final output?
Oh yeah, sure. I usually render out, at least if I need a background, or I need the object to be separated from the background, I'm using a PNG with included alpha. But yeah, also for this, I think I used just PNG and went for something like 2000 or something. And then I also render out the clown pass, so I easily can adjust different parts of the image in Photoshop afterwards. And for the settings itself, I always use maximum samples. If I'm not on a very tight deadline, I'm using maximum time, but I kind of always have time for the maximum samples. And sometimes I just type in like 1000 and let it render, and if it midways looks good, I maybe stop it, or Yeah, I really think that this is great because I can put in a high amount of samples that I know is enough, and I can just let it render, and I can stop it at any time I want when I think it looks good enough. I actually don't use the advanced control anymore. Only maximum time and maximum samples.
Okay. So in this case, you use the camera. Do you find yourself using view sets very often?
Yeah, sometimes I do. When I have to do more than one rendering of the same object, I use view sets because the lighting that looks good from this angle might not look good if I go over here, something like that. So for this, I would do another view set and do custom lighting for this angle. So yeah, I use that quite a lot when doing more than one rendering of the same object.
Okay. We also have a few people asking again if the BIP file is available to download, and
Yeah.
that's available on your site, right?
Yeah, it's available on my website, esbenoxholm.dk, and then /DIY for do-it-yourself. You can press the download button here, and it takes you to my Gumroad page, where you can download it for free. And as you said, it's also on the new download page that you have with scenes of different kinds of stuff.
Cool.
So Esben, on on the model, do you for the graphics, do you model the graphics and logos, or do you use labels in KeyShot? How do you go through that usually?
That depends. On this watch, I was able to have it in my hand while modeling it, and I could see that at least the logo up here, that it was protruding the material a bit by very little. I probably could have done the same with the bump map, but the rest of the graphics I did with labels. The label here is saying Falcon. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this one here, and the graphics around the second phase and all these small ones, because they are applied to the material as a label in reality. So I like to do what's done in reality, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Ah, yeah, that makes complete sense. Thanks.
Cool.
There's one person wondering about what would happen if you turn the ground plane off. I remember going through this when we first set up, and it was kind of interesting how that changes.
Yeah. Let me just put on the glass again and going out of performance mode. Yeah, the ground plane actually have a huge impact on the final look, because if I go and turn it off, you can see the lighting looking like this. So it kind of adds a lot to how the material look and how we get this reflection as well in the glass compared to not having it. And we also lose all that blue color that is reflecting off the ground plane up in this area. Was that an answer?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cool. No problem.
So does your workflow change between different types of scenes? Like, I know you do a lot of product shots, but if you're working, maybe you have that product inside of an interior scene, how does your workflow shift from setting to setting?
I mean, it's kind of similar the way I do it. That I like to, before opening KeyShot, have a clear vision of what I'm going to do, and I like to settle on the angle and the composition before doing any materials and lighting, and yeah, and then doing the materials and then do the lighting and then do a bit of adjusting everything and then do the final render output, and of course work in iterations. So the process itself is kind of similar no matter what I'm doing.
Very, very good to know. Let's see. They're almost coming in here too quick. We may have to.
There's a lot.
Do this.
Esben, what kind of work do you do in Photoshop compared to in KeyShot?
It's actually all kinds of extra stuff that you also usually do on photographs, such as enhancing the contrast in some areas and maybe do a bit of color grading and adding in the special effects, sort of like the small dust particles that I had on my engine and lens flares. If you look at the final render of this, let me just show that one. Okay, it's a bit slow. Yeah, here it comes. You can see that I'm having just a tiny lens flare up here. And that's added in the post. And maybe I also enhance like the reflections here on this sun polished part, and I have a bit of lens flare over here. And if I'm going for trying to achieve a super realistic look, I also do stuff like chromatic aberration and some vignette around the corners. So I do all kind of stuff that I can't do within KeyShot. If I can do it within KeyShot, I do it within KeyShot.
So the vignetting, for example, why would you decide to do it in KeyShot rather than in post, or vice versa?
Oh yeah, okay. That one I actually do in Photoshop as well, because if I render it out with the vignette on, then I can't change it later on if I at the end think it's too much or too little. Too little I can always change, but if it's too much I can't. But I can do that if I do it in Photoshop.
So if it's something that requires flexibility, such as the vignette, which you may want to adjust the opacity of, or maybe if you're using the depth pass and you need to be able to change the depth of field, then you're using those features in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just adjusting brightness and contrast and making some details more sharp and all that kind of stuff.
Is the texture on the crown, or is that actually a texture, or is that modeled in?
That is actually a texture. Let me just zoom up to it. It's just a metallic paint material with this diamond knurl displacement in the bump node. And I think this one comes with KeyShot actually. Not quite sure though.
I haven't seen that one before. That's a nice one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe you can share that on KeyShot Cloud.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Yeah, maybe it's a good time to mention that. Do you ever search for materials on the cloud library, or?
Yes, I tend to do that. If I need something specific before doing it by myself from the bottom up, I search if there's anything like it. to use or just to be inspired of. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we still have more questions in here. Josh, do we need to wrap things up, or can we continue to go through some of these? Do you see anything else that can be addressed?
Yeah, we can do a couple more questions. There seem to be some questions on texture first, where the sites that you use again, and then setting up textures, how you went about that.
For some specific part, or
let's see.
Maybe for the band.
like the leather?
Yeah.
I actually didn't do much about that. It was the one of the Johnson leather materials that is on the cloud that I actually just dragged and dropped, and yeah, maybe I adjusted the scale a bit, but that's actually all I did for the leather. Quite easy.
All right.
Yeah, I just adjusted the scale.
We got a lot of people asking about post-processing. Do you have the Photoshop file on hand for this image?
No, I'm sorry, I do not. But if people have Photoshop, again, they can go to this, download it here, because I have included the layered PSD file with all post-processing, and I have named all my layers to kind of describe what they're doing, so hopefully people can see what each layer is doing by turning it on and off.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't have it right now, sorry.
Okay. The material type of the watch body, that's a metallic paint?
Yes, it is, and it's a metallic paint with just the procedural brushed texture that you can find by right-clicking and then going to the textures. And it's the first one up here. Yeah, I have applied it with a cylindrical mapping type. Yeah, and that's about it. And then I have adjusted the scale of it, and now it seems like I did something. Again, it's a pretty great help that you can get into the color preview by pressing C. Oh yeah, I did it way too big. Yeah, something like that. And that's actually it. The brush goes into the bump slot.
Okay.
Sometimes I also add it to the base color and the clear coat roughness. It depends also a bit on the lighting, how clear it comes through and how clear I want it to come through.
Okay.
Okay, that's great, Esben. Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. Really great to see your workflow and how you set things up. That's all the time we have this week, and so
Cool.
just a reminder, we will have this up on the KeyShot website and the KeyShot YouTube channel. If you haven't tried KeyShot 6, go snag it at keyshot.com/try, and be sure to stop by Esben's website and grab those models too to try out. It's all set up ready for you to play with. that wraps things up. We'll also have the questions. We'll try to answer some of those when we post the post the webinar up. And just want to thank everybody and wish you all a great day.
Yeah, thanks for watching, and you are always welcome to contact me if you have any more questions about my work and how I do stuff. I will be happy to help you out.
Excellent.
Thanks for watching. Yeah, no problem.